Welcome to EpiSTEM podcast. This EpiSTEM podcast is brought to you from the National Centre of STEM Education at the School of Education in the University of Limerick. I'm your host, Geraldine Simmie, and I'm the Professor of STEM Education here at the Centre and the Director of EpiSTEM. And my co-host,
Michelle Starr, and I am the Research Liaison Officer in EpiSTEM.
Welcome back, everybody. Now we're on our final podcast for this academic year. We're about to enter into a period of quiet time for research over the summer. So, Michelle, we're ready for
We are indeed. Yes, it's the last episode before we break up for the summer.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a very exciting episode.
It is, I hope. And it's just the two of us. And
yep.
I suppose a little recap on the year. I think I've been very pleased that we've had lots of voices. I mean, we have had people refer to the fact that we've had voices of student teachers, experienced teachers, researchers from EpiSTEM and our colleagues in the School of Education. And we've had, the Limerick Education Support Centre. We've had the director, the Hunt Museum, if I can think rightly, our international colleague, Professor Sarah Tolbert from Australia.
Yeah. And we had the three schools from the project. We had the teachers and the pupils from Coláiste Ciarán Croom, Thomond College and Nano Nagle. So it was a very very wide mix and very different perspectives on STEM education that we that each of our episodes on a whole what they looked at.
Yeah. And I suppose if you like, you're looking for surprises when you interview people. And the great warm and welcoming surprise for me was how open all our colleagues are and everybody that was on about that need for some new thinking. We've got kind of not simple, just having the answers to everything, a problem posing type of STEM education being needed to battle the big complex problems in the world today. That has been heartwarming for me.
Yeah, exactly. And what I found out from it as well, looking at our, for example, our different colleagues and even the physicists that we talked to in the first episode this year, which was Tara Ryan, is. And then you went to the students and their the way they worked with their teachers and what Sarah Tolbert talked about and how she approached hers. It was all around relational, wasn't it?
It was.
That effective teaching that you always and we always talk about, which is so important.
Yes. Even in the last few days, even listening to the news worldwide and all of that, I've really, really come to kind of understand the difference between a relational view of education and an interactional view. Yeah. A kind of interaction, we know people on the news every day that are interactional and that are functional and that are instrumental and everything is cost-benefit analysis. But a teacher and a student in that relationship of learning, it is genuinely like a relationship takes two to tango. And
exactly.
It's in the middle between them, isn't it?
And we can't forget that, because sometimes, when you're talking to, and all of our guests spoke about that relation with the teacher that gave them that aspiration or that light to continue down the field of their studies. And so that none of us have to forget that in our own research, because that is very much part of it's that engagement between the teacher and the student. Yeah,
it strikes me that means that there's a layer above and beyond the instruction, and there's a layer above and beyond measuring, and there's a layer above and beyond managing, and it's that kind of being able to see kind of the eye contact between the student and the teacher, being back since COVID, being back in personal relations in the classroom, so important for well-being and health and everything. And it's come across very strongly in the podcast, talking to everyone. At some point it has come up.
Exactly. And also that bringing in the arts into the STEM.
Yes.
Because it disrupts it a little bit, because art is very... it doesn't have that rigid, like STEM education, the STEM subjects have a border, don't they?
Yeah,
they tend to have a rigid border, whereas the art is very flexible and it's you can see it as a movement, and it does bring a different aspect into the whole area. We heard the students here talk about it.
I mean, it's for me, it's the understanding of an education. It's like if the STEM needs the arts and ethics, because without it, it would be very deterministic, and we'd only be listing things that we'd be doing, and an effective teacher would be somebody that would be going in to do things to the students
and
that's
to
what
it's trying to be.
Yeah,
that's what it's trying to become,
as opposed to actually the experience, the democratizing knowledge, and having good educational experiences, and that open ethical question of education wouldn't be there anymore.
Exactly, I agree totally.
So today, anyway, for the podcast, we thought about episode 7 was an introduction to the way we work with our PhD students in terms of introducing them to big ideas and concepts, and having theoretical frameworks, and working with the big questions, and doing their research with the PhD structure on them in education. And Michelle, you're an expert on the French intellectual Pierre Bourdieu. You like critical sociology, and you use the lens of Bourdieu quite a bit. And so I'd like to ask you some questions on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't know if I'm an expert, but I'm always learning. I mean, I love reading about him, and the more I read, and from different perspectives, because you take it in from different perspectives, and I use it a lot in my classroom teaching for the young teachers, to have that lens. And what it kind of it's that critical lens. He's that critique, using Bourdieu to critique that schooling is not a neutral space, that it gives off. It's more of a political, and, the social implicates it, and the culture. And it's all about, it's where inclusion and success are shaped by these broader socio-cultural and political factors. So we have to take that into account, because especially nowadays, where education is transformed more and more, as we see with this performance-driven system, which is all about standardised testing, and it's meant to show this, as the word says, standardised. So therefore, everyone goes in, does the standard test, and then the outcome, and that takes it as if it's completely neutral, and it's all about accountability and choice. These are thrown in there as well, all the neoliberal words, where accountability is accountability of the school. Because, about the grades, the accountability of the teacher and their subject and teaching the subject. And it goes with the grades and the performance. And then the accountability of the individual student and the subject, and about what grades do they come. And that's where choice comes in. And I know there are many different aspects of the word choice within education. But in this aspect, what I'm talking about, it goes down to the choice. Well, it's the choice of the individual to be motivated enough or to learn, and they're responsible for their performance outcomes. And this is all embedded within that bigger picture of meritocracy, where, education is meant to be where everyone has the opportunity to do better and to get on, and then this allows for the discourses of the deficit discourses that you and I talk about a lot, and we just do not like. It's that disadvantaged and the lack of motivation, lack of inspiration. It's individualising the whole thing, and it's forgetting about the bigger picture.
So you were saying that when Bourdieu actually takes account of all, that people are kind of, without knowing it, we're tucked in a kind of a culture and a norm that's there, and we're kind of believing that we have so much choice, if you like, and that it's up to ourselves to get a grip on ourselves and to perform. And then we have the system who's actually kind of, the umbrella of the system is down over-emphasising performance, because I suppose there's nothing wrong with performance or results, but when it's the only umbrella in town, maybe that's the problem.
Exactly, that is the problem, because that's where I think the trio comes in, and that's where the student comes in, the teacher comes in, and the school system, and then you can say the curriculum as well. So it's that, and what Bourdieu does, it's that he's all about relation. And that's why I find it works very well in that the relational and effective teaching, because it's all about the relation between agency and structure. So agency is the individuals, whether it's the teacher, and the student, and then the structure, which is the school system, the school itself.
The regulatory system and everything.
Or the subject is the structure.
A structure,
So we have to work out, and so you break it down then what's going on, and he has his theoretical framework, which is very good for this, is habitus, which is the individual. So what is habitus? We are socialised, each of us, from the moment we are born. We're socialised. We develop dispositions. That's our way of thinking, our way of categorisation, our way of processing information, our accents, our behaviour, everything about us. And of course, that's all embedded within our family at first, and then within the
schooling
system and the community. But that's very classed as well, because as an individual, we're all born into a social class. We're all born into a gender.
Yes.
We're all born into an ethnicity, whether it's the majority or the minority within that nation.
So Bourdieu takes all, he's puzzling that, and then you're using habitus. Has he any other big ideas or concepts then that help as well if you're thinking with him?
You see, it has to work in tandem with capital. So I talked about capital. We're all born with different capitals, whether it's the economic capital, social capital, which is your networks, your family networks, and that's in and around social class. And then, of course, your cultural capital, your family, how educated you are, where you fit within the dominant culture of, for in the Irish, which is white Irish Catholic, or are you a minority culture who's here, so it's all fits in with that.
Is that kind of on his book, Taste and Distinction, kind
exactly.
of? Is that what that's about?
Yes, exactly. So this is the human that goes into this classroom with all of this.
Yes.
And then they're fitting in, and the classroom is the school, is the field. So he's got the habitus capitals field and the work into it. And the culture, then you have to take, and it's the field that positions all of us.
Yes.
All the habitus, all the little individuals. All of us, once we walk into a place, we're positioned, because it's all about the culture of that. And as we know the school system is a middle class white culture. So what about the child who goes into the system and doesn't have that middle class culture? They don't have the linguistic ability, and Mark Rourke, in his study in 2009, showed that very well on students aged 9, where he did, he was talking to students about after they did the Drumcondra test, and where they're given a sentence and then a word out of the sentence, and they're asked to they're given a choice of the meaning of that word. And middle class children could use, because they had this knowledge in their dispositions, in their habitus, from their homes, from their socialisation of how these words could be used, and they could guess it. Whereas working, with a lot of kids, they might not have that linguistic.
No, socially disadvantaged children might have more of a restricted language and be treated even differently in the classroom by the teacher and everything.
So it is. So we have to be careful, and we have to look at that culture. We have to take all of it together, and we have to look at the culture of the school system and the STEM subjects that positions the young. So it's and think it's all about that relation between the habitus, the capitals, and how the system itself, whether it's in the classroom, positions the children. And we have to be reflexive about it, and know what's going on and understand what's going on, because otherwise we're reproducing what's going on in the system. But and the biggest thing about culture is the doxa. It's what's normalised, legitimised. For example, those words, those deficit words that we talk about. So we have to interrogate the history of where all of this came from. And that brings us into, like I've talked about the socialisation, and it brings it into the importance of history and the political, which is you have written a huge amount on, and you've researched a huge amount on politics and policy, and especially within the education system. So now I'm going to ask you about how policy is made and enacted and what it does.
Yeah, well, before I start talking about policy, maybe just to finish on what you've been talking there about Pierre Bourdieu, like that, working with that intellectual and working with that an individual like the work of Pierre Bourdieu, like he shows us, I suppose, and for me in policy as well, my area is critical policy studies, but I draw from, I suppose, a number of fields. I'm a bit of a wasp around the place. I don't ever sit comfortably inside any one of the fields, so sometimes I'm drawn very strongly into critical pedagogy. More times I come out and I'm in the feminist studies, and then I dip into the agonistics as well, and I find the work of Biesta and Sharon Todd and all of those very, very good, very interesting. So I kind of, as I said, pop in and out between those different fields, if you like.
Exactly.
Yeah, to come in. But I suppose if I was to summarise, I suppose critical feminist policy studies is where I've landed. But I have been about 15 years growing into that space, because I started off with what would be a very positivistic kind of research, but discovered on the journey, kind of a discovery journey between the work of Kathleen Lynch and Pierre Bourdieu and others like, for example, Paulo Freire and Henry Giroux and Peter McLaren, found as I was going along in the journey, I was beginning to say, yeah, sure, there's nothing here that is actually simple and straightforward and linear, and we get fed a very kind of, I suppose, a vertical discourse that doesn't actually do justice to the fact that education is a cultural problem. It's a relational problem. It's a perpetually open ethical question. And we don't really do justice to that when we bring in, I suppose, just instruction and instrumental and interaction and management and managerial. So I suppose that's my field. That's where I write the research. And I have been lecturing here for the last 10, 12 years in a module with PhD students on policy studies as well. And that's been, again, I'm open to learning. I'm very much into puzzling and problem posing rather than coming up with neat answers.
Well, exactly, because nothing is ever fixed. It's always in flux, because people, when you've humans in the middle, they're always, in that flux. So we're always challenging and people challenge the system, and it's always good to be open and always leave questions, isn't that? That is the way it should
That's
be.
it.
Looking at the why and always questioning it.
Yeah. I mean, the big questions for me in education are: who are we? I think that's a question, because somebody has defined us, actually. And I don't know that definition of the Enlightenment person, even though it's been around for a few hundred years now, I'm not sure that actually, that model stands up in today's world. I think, who are we? I think, how do we make sense of the world, and how do we act in the world? And even going back to the notion of what is a good life. And then I am very strong about the need for scientific knowledge. I'm very strong in the need for science and STEM and STEAM and all of that. I'm very strong about the needing of all that, because we are in a complex world and we're moving into a highly scientific world. And in the work I'm doing with the European Commission, there's this dream that maybe into the future that we will be able to manage a green and digital transition in Europe that'll be fair and that'll be equitable and decent. However, we can dream on if we're going to actually do it as just being what we were talking there earlier, if we were just seeing it as just good instruction and the state having no other role other than to maybe throw out a policy and to fire in an accountability system and then think its job is done. Yeah. Because my big question around all this, and the thing that bothers me, is how do we act with this knowledge for the greater good of society? And if we don't mention that problem when we're teaching and when we're in the classroom, then we ignore it. And then how are we going to end up having young people understanding that they're actually not smart students on their own, going off there with education as some kind of a private good, that they're actually in a system that has got a public good and a public interest value, and that they're actually meant to be a contributing member of a society and an active citizen, engaging and wanting with all the value systems that they have to make a difference to the world. Where do we get that excitement if we actually keep going around at the moment, which is what we're doing, and we're really saying for the last 10, 15 years we have been saying that education is really a private good. It's leave it to the markets, a neoliberal kind of a take on it, and all you have to be is the smart SMART. And I always remind my students that's self-regulating, motivated, adaptive, responsive, and technologically competent. But nothing in there is saying that I need to be caring for others, that I need to be cooperating, that I need to be genuinely listening to people, that I need to be genuinely stepping up in my relationships, that I need to be doing things ethically, and never mind anything that says we need to be political animals, which is what we are, where if you're out there as a citizen and you're human and you're interested in the kind of world you're in, society and the environment and planet and all that. So those are the great big puzzles coming from critical policy studies.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, because that whole smart and, that you brought in that individualisation and the privatisation, the private, it's what you get out of the system. It all fits in with this. It leverages this competitiveness that we're talking about, which is, it's like getting into this cycle of competitiveness and then of performance and about accountability. And it forgets about the relational that we all do and the socialisation, because we are human at the end of the day, and we're social creatures. And so when you're looking and critiquing, then tell me about your I suppose, will I ask you how policy is made and enacted, I suppose?
Yeah, I think the work of Stephen Ball has been a great help to me. He's a postmodern take on it, but that that it's complex, it's made of assemblages, it isn't straightforward black and white, kind of done down on people, and yet at the same time they're very powerful supranational actors, and there's a whole lot of actors in Ireland as well, with a very strong vested interest in education. Whose interest does it serve? Some of them, and then not everybody has equal voice. So the role of not only capital and the economists and the powerful corporate interests, but the interests of the churches are very strong in education, particularly in Ireland, where that's even within the Education Act. So they're very strong and powerful actors, and they usually stay very quiet and stay out of it unless something is done that upsets their view of education. But they're very powerful actors. So then you'd have the Parents Association, the teacher unions, everybody else. So voice is very, very different along the way. So you learn that as you're going, you understand the influences coming in from outside. The problem with us in Ireland, I suppose, is, and I've come to understand it more and more, is we have a narrative of liking to be the best, the best little country and the best everything, and having great results, and look at us doing very well in PISA and all this kind of stuff, and look at everyone else doing terribly and all that. So we've ingested what Kathleen Lynch and Sheila Drudy called a view of consensualism, that we're all the time we love that idea of that we're all in this together. We've good social partnerships. We do all that very well. We're very strong on wanting that kind of, aren't we doing very well? So we must have really very much a success culture, so that this idea of the competitiveness and all that, so in other words, we turn education into a bit of a football match, everyone wearing the jersey or wearing the skirts and going out there and in they go, and the match is on and you have the cameras rolling and you're measuring the performance and then you're analysing the match and all that. So we turn it into like match of the day. The classroom space is turned really into match of the day, with neoliberal policy breathing down on top of it. And there isn't that much, so instead of it being risk facilitating and an openness in there and having it as a perpetually open ethical question and understanding the importance of those relationships that are being made and the learning and all of that, and instead of actually giving breathing space for joy of learning and all of that, we have tipped the balance too much away from cooperation and caring, and justice and all that. We've tipped it all over into, as I said, my idea of match of the day, blood in our shirts. Do you remember the Unbelievables? They'd be saying you have to have blood in your shirts now and the young, or else you'll never get into the under 12s hurling, that kind of approach. So that, so we're very strongly wedded, I think, to that narrative. So what we're not good at then is we're not good at philosophy and asking why. We're not good at teasing out problems. We're not great at critical, as a country, we're not great at critically examining something and holding it out long enough to come up with new ideas and imagination. So like everyone likes to shut the debate down quickly and give simplistic answers. And that's where the far right have been grown across Europe and even in Ireland and everything. That's where all that's coming from, because they know things are rich in values and they know we must talk about values and they know we must talk about philosophy. So so my papers on Ireland, on the Pied Piper of neoliberalism, my research papers there, I have a good number of research papers done critiquing policy both in Ireland and at European and OECD level. And my Pied Piper of neoliberalism, it was a book I bought in Charlie Byrne's bookshop in Galway years ago, a lovely big book. Oh, really gorgeous, with the Pied Piper of Hamelin
story.
Story.
Sounds like a great bedtime read.
Absolutely. But I think I saw one, the picture of the Pied Piper playing the seductive tune. So the seductive tune, I thought, being played out in education with the reforms, I think they really disappoint, because the seductive tune is that education is just about management. And it's just about get the metrics, the data driven, have it, manage it, nothing messy. Don't have any debates, don't have any contrarian views, and have nothing critical going on. And we kind of live in that that has been normalised in the last 5 years, 10 years in particular. And so that gives me, that worries me around our capacity to hold out some critical questions, to look at the future, to be able to be future ready, to be ahead of the curve, all of that. And I'm reminded of Howie in Australia, who says that if we close down those spaces and make them social obligations, we'll have got rid of democracy. We'll have actually got rid of any concept of this, society, and we'll have got rid of that bigger picture. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't make sense. And actually the whole thing makes sense, because I love that, you brought in that consensualization and our need to want success, and about, and then it plays into that whole performance, and it's easy to look at things on performance, and you can not rig performance, but you can adjust performance to make it look good. But and we don't want any contrarian ideas or that lack of critical. I think it is, and what do you think? This is very historical, really, isn't it? Because we do come from, you're talking about the big players, at the moment we'll have the corporation, the corporate players, the capitalists within education, but we came from a very
theocracies.
Theocracy, the church.
Yes. And before that, colonisation.
Exactly. So it was always keeping down, not having a voice. And I suppose we've never learnt to have a voice, or we find.
Definitely. I mean, we could do another 20 podcasts on this, because the history is there, the colonisation, the way the state was run. We've lots of good things that have been done and
Absolutely.
all that, but in the space of it all, that kind of urge into, doffing the hat at the important person and having them tell us how to think is so ingrained inside our culture. But anyway, so that makes policy important, but it also makes not only, for me, it makes sure that nobody analyses policy pretending that it's not rich in values and pretending that it's not full of actual values, so that it's not neutral. No more than what you said about Bourdieu. There's nothing about policy that's neutral, so you can't come at it and pretend you're neutral yourself when you're going at it. So I think it's best to, worry it up there, trouble it, see what's actually been invited, asked of us, and then ask behind the question then, who do they think we are? Because there is like, who are we? And that's actually played out in policy if we're seeing that we must constantly be wearing a smartwatch, comparing ourselves to someone else the whole time. And a Seller and Lingard paper years ago, I read it and it said, look, it's very simple. It's you only need to do one or two things to make this happen, and that is constantly comparing yourself to others. So now you have people wearing the smartwatch nearly checking, are they breathing? You know, have they their 10,000 steps done? If you get people doing that and they're wearing the smartwatch, and now very soon you can smartwatch them with everything. So externally, so they don't actually, they no longer have embodied knowledge. They don't know how they feel. They don't know anything like that. It's all programmed. So it's like having a little chip in you. I examined a PhD there by Lee some years ago in Lancaster, and he had done a study on the smart pupil and the smart person as if they were microchipped.
Yeah.
But anyway,
that is always the worry. So you've published a huge amount on policy in Ireland. Do you want to tell us something about,
Well, I suppose I think I've given the best, a good outline of it today, and I think I'm happy to finish up the podcast other than to say, I suppose, that I think it's an area that's very important. It's a fascinating area of study, but I think it's really important to use the critical lens and to grow people who can be problem posing and who can work with respect with others and do that. But for me, democracy is important. So STEM education and STEAM education are very exciting areas to be in, to be the director of EPI-STEM and to be able to help young researchers to find their feet in that space is really a great honour indeed. But also to be able to do it where, like, to have that philosophical hat on and work with great thinkers like Bourdieu, like Paulo Freire, like Maxine Greene, like
Haraway, all of them.
Those.
Donna Ray,
Donna Haraway, all of those, Bell Hooks, all of those great thinkers, and we're I suppose for me the secret is we have this great shoulders of giants there in the system that we can move from.
And keep interrogating the why,
and from
the different aspects, the political and the social, and it's all wrapped up in the culture and historically.
That's it. And Jesse Bazoul there I think it's the University of Regina in Canada talks about, well, if we have to, education changes with every big major change in the world. So we've got to see it as a perpetually open ethical question rather than something that's closed down and we have all the answers.
Yeah, exactly.
So is there anything you'd like to add to
No, not at all.
You've enjoyed doing the podcast with me?
I really enjoyed doing the podcast, and I enjoy the fact that we don't, nothing is, we always believe that nothing is simplistic, and it cannot be theoretical either, that we have to keep with the messiness of it and keep with the challenges.
Yeah, and I think where I think we both believe education and STEM education is a cultural problem rather than an instrumental one.
I agree.
But it's been heartwarming talking to and listening to all of our contributors in the last 2021 podcasts. It's been very interesting listening because we've had a lot of very good conversations. So I have a few people to thank, and we'll do that now. I suppose our producer here we're in the Digital Hub in the University of Limerick. We've got this lovely professional studio. You should see it. It's absolutely beautiful. And when you come to University of Limerick, you should visit it. And our producer, Greg Rogala, we want to thank him very much because he keeps us on track. And
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. He keeps an eye on us and time and everything else. So we want to thank the students from the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance because they provide us with some beautiful tunes and everything at the end to finish up. And they have made a huge contribution to the podcast. Obviously our colleagues, researchers, research assistants in EPI-STEM and in the School of Education, and all our community-based friends, the Hunter Museum and the local schools and the students and teachers have all been so good to us, including Clough Jordan Eco Village. And the President of Ireland was terrific with us, Michael D. Higgins. He gave us an endorsement for our Eco Village project. We want to thank him for that. RTE's Dermot Bannon came on and gave us a lovely video that we want to thank him for. And we've got colleagues around the world, including Professor Sarah Tolbert that has been on, and the local enterprises, Boston Scientific, Cerecep, Analog, Eli Lilly and the ESB. We want to thank them for all their support throughout the year in the different projects we have been doing. I suppose as we wind off now, we are so deeply grateful to all of them and thank them for, I suppose, a very enjoyable year. And thanks, Michelle. And I think we'll start up again refreshed in the autumn after our research.
Exactly. We'll do a lot of I have intentions of doing a lot of writing during the summer.
Yeah, me too. And I think we'll get back to our problem posing in STEM and STEAM education then early in the autumn again. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
So we're going to finish off with a piece of music by Ciara Gainey. Ciara is from Dingle. She's a student here in the University of Limerick. She's a BA in Irish music she's doing. She's a piano player. She's going to play us out with a beautiful, beautiful piece of music called Gan Anam. It's a Gan Anam jig. And it's actually without a name, Gan Anam. I think that's my bit of Irish. So listen, enjoy the piece of music and have a lovely time until we see you again.